Hello everyone and welcome back to Bitwig Studio and Music Production. This is lesson 5.15 and in this lesson we're going to wrap up and cover what I was able to create for my E-Snare creation project. Just as a reminder, we had access to the E-Snare, the comb filter, the delay 2, the EQ5, the transient control, Klanghelm's IVGI, the tall tube. We had our container, the XY effect, and then we also had our audio modulator, which in this case is called the audio mod. We also had just 2 hours to complete something. And so in this video, I'm going to just walk you through my process, what I was able to come up with. The first thing I want to mention is when you do have a time constraint like 2 hours, don't be alarmed if you were doing this and you found yourself after the 2 hours still working on your first element. Like let's say you were doing a drum beat and you made a kick drum using the E-Snare and then you were starting to process it with the comb and you just got so caught up in that it took 2 hours and then the time ran out. That's totally okay, and that's going to happen. It happens to a lot of us. There are people, and I've seen it and you've probably seen it, who can make full tracks in like an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours, and they're pretty good at the end. You listen to and you go, whoa, that's really good. Like that's a full track in 2.5 hours. Why can't I do that? Am I doing something wrong? And the answer is no, you're not doing anything wrong if you're unable to do that. For the most time, those people are really working in a producer mindset. They have an idea of what sort of sound and genre they're going for. They have a template that usually accommodates them, or they just know exactly the steps they're going to take. And when you know those things, when you know the synth you're going to pull for, when you know the sound you're going for, it can go by very quickly, or you can accomplish a lot in a very small amount of time. For us, we're doing very creative and a lot of times experimental, purely creation-based assignments, and we're starting from complete scratch. We're starting with a blank canvas. And when you start with a blank canvas with not a whole lot of ideas to what you're going to do, it's possible to get caught up on one small detail for hours and hours and hours. This also happens to many artists and producers today. I think Daft Punk spends like weeks just trying to get the vocoder sound exactly as they want it. So don't worry if you go through and maybe there's one day you're working for 2 hours and all you get is a kick drum out of it. And then another day you work for 2 hours and you're able to go through like the entire track. Those sort of things just seem to happen. Whenever you're doing something creative or artistic, you're going to have those days where things just tend to all flow a lot better than others. And I don't really think there's any strategies or ways to cope with that other than just knowing that that is what will happen and enjoying the process, enjoying just being in there and working and trying to create something on your own, which I think is pretty cool in and of itself. So I started with the E-Snare and I just synthesized out a bunch of different drum sounds because I said to myself, let's be ambitious. Let's do something I'm not comfortable with. Let's try to work on making a drum beat, maybe make a bass sound, maybe make a pad sound, make a lead sound, and see if we can put that all together. Obviously, I was shooting way too high, and so we'll kind of go through this and talk about how I had to continue to strip those ideas back. But anyway, here are the sounds I came up with. Here is my kick sound. It's really like a boomy 808 bass, so if you don't have headphones on, you probably won't be able to hear this too well. Okay, I'm just going to turn up my volume too. We also have this percussion sound. We have this percussion sound. We have this snare sound. We have a long snare sound. A hat. A second hat. A third hat. This is like supposed to be a crash. The C key on my keyboard isn't working, so that's why this says rash here. I'm not trying to be funny. That's just literally my C key stopped working. I know you guys don't care about that, but in case you're wondering why that says rash, that's the reason. And then also when I started out, I was thinking I can show you guys some really cool sound design techniques using just basic like sine waves, using tones to then be able to make a pad or a lead or a bass. Ultimately, I ran out of time, but what I did do was I resampled just some tones using the snare, E-Snare instrument. So here's an A1. Here's an A2. Here's an A3, A4, and an A5. Okay, so at the time I was thinking, yeah, I can do a whole lot with that and it will be really cool and fun. But ultimately, as I started to get into messing around with my drum sounds and trying to make a beat, I had to put that on the side burner, or on the back burner, I guess you'd say. So here we have the basic drum beat that I was able to come up with. This is pretty much just using those sounds. What I did was I made these little audio clips of like 2 bars, and then inside the clips I just added my events, my sounds that I had just shown you before. And so here's what the drum beat sounded like after I finished with that. There's some basic panning on here, but apart from that, I didn't do too much apart from reverse a few sounds, pull some things out with stretch, make some gain adjustments, etc. So here's what we have. So that's very simple, but you'd be amazed at just how long that actually took to both synthesize out my sounds and to come up with this drum beat. It actually took me like more than an hour, or approximately an hour, to do that. So if it's taking me an hour to do that, granted, I'm not comfortable with drums, it goes to show that you really have to be focused. Like, I needed to work a lot faster if I wanted to do more in that time frame. I actually also used the shuffle here, the global shuffle, and I applied it to my hat clips. I didn't apply it to the kick or to the snares. I'm going to go over exactly how you're going to want to use those in probably the very last section of this course, but just be aware that I did use that a little bit if you were curious. But when I actually go in and when I program drums, I tend to either A, play them in and then not do any quantizing, or B, when I draw my sounds in or I am copying and pasting, I do just kind of listen for where I want the sound to fall, and I kind of completely ignore the grid. So I do a lot of clicking and holding down shift to drop things exactly where I want it. I worked a lot using, or at least in the background, I had the triplet grid going quite a bit. All right, so let's move on now to E-Snare number 3, my next save file. And in here, I think I have a lot of processing to pretty much all of the sounds except for the last one. So we can see plenty of processing. There's also some automation going on, etc., etc., etc. So now we can take a quick listen to this. I also have a send effect, just a delay too, where I've EQ'd out some of the low end. So let's take a listen back to what we have here. And again, all of this stuff is pretty basic in terms of what I did to process the sounds. You can see some of these chains here. There's so few effects that if you guys go through and do this on your own, you're going to figure out how to use those effects really well because you're so limited in what you have. So let's take a listen back now. I also chopped this up to make it a little bit more interesting. So you can hear that when we've added in all those different delays, and the majority of those are going at offbeat or at sort of manually set times, we're getting some unique polyrhythms and some additional texture. It makes it sound a little bit fuller. It doesn't just sound like somebody dropping random drum samples around and saying, here's my drum beat. All right, so we can move on to, I guess this is E-Snare number 4, my 4th save. And in this one, I started to do some stuff with this crash, or as it's called here, rash. What I did here was I used the XY effect, and on each one of these, I used the audio mod to take my source from the kick. The reason I did that was because the only thing that plays at the same time as these, at least consistently, is the kick drum. So that was the only thing that was really going to make this have an impact. And inside of each of those, I have some different effects. And so this is pretty cool if we just solo out this track. And let's see if we have this going. Just put it down to A. So we can hear the different variations I was able to come up with. Here's B. Here's C. And here's D. And let's just open it up so we can actually see things moving. Let me go back to C. I think on one of these I actually did something pretty cool. Maybe it's B. Oh, I think it is C. On C, I actually jacked the filter around and set the audio mod to mess with that. So I'm going to make a video after this one about how exactly you can use the audio mod to do some really crazy things. For now, I'm not going to go into too great of depth, but basically all you have to do is select this mod button, and you can then control something based on the envelope of whatever this source is. So in the case of our kick, it goes boom and then it fades out. I also have the envelope follower to give it a bit of attack and a longer release. So if we just watch how these frequencies move here. And if we play that back with the kick, you'll get a better sense of this. If I want, I could add longer release. Or we can turn the envelope follower off, and that will give it just like a straight response, which gets a little crazy, as you can tell. So there are some good uses of the envelope follower if you want to try to control things a little bit better. So anyway, we can move on now to the next one. And now this was basically like my final exporting, and I actually exported it here. So we can listen back to this. I did a ton of different automation, and this was when I pretty much ran out of time. So as my time was running out, I didn't have a chance to go in and really iron out any of these envelopes too great, but that's okay. That's how it goes sometimes. We can go in and take a quick listen to what I was able to come up with. So you can hear that, and obviously we're getting some pretty wicked feedback coming out of this, because inside of this delay I have some feedback effects. But that's okay, because on my final project I can obviously go in and fix some of those gain problems and everything else. So last but not least, I resampled this. I pulled it into just one simple track here, and I added a few... I thought I added some effects to the master. I guess I actually put them on the audio 2 track itself. I could have put these on the master if I wanted to. These are basically my mastering plugins here. Let me just move the limiter to the master. All right, so we can listen to the final result here. So, okay, nothing super fancy there, but that did take a little bit over 2 hours to complete, and hopefully that gives you guys some extra confidence because that's really not the greatest drum beat or anything in the world. A lot of that I had to do just out of necessity because of time, but I hope that inspires you a little bit to see that I don't have the best of days always. I'm not super, super thrilled with that. Actually, after giving it a day and listening back to it, I'm a little bit happier with it. But ultimately, it's whatever your mind and wherever your mind wants to take you with these particular creation projects. I could have just as easily done something totally different, not decided to go with a drum beat. I did it in this case because I wanted to practice what I've been preaching and trying to do things you're not super comfortable with. I'm not really comfortable making beats. I'm not very good at it, but it's great to go in there and try it nonetheless. Also, I want to show you that I did group all of these tracks into like one master track so I could turn the volume down because things were getting a little bit loud when they were all combined, and Bitwig doesn't just let you select all the faders and turn them down. So instead, I grouped everything and then was able to just pull this down so I could give myself a bit of headroom and not have any clipping problems. So I hope this has been helpful for you guys. In the next video, we're actually going to look at the audio mod in a little greater detail because in the process of making this creation, I was able to learn a whole lot about it, and I want to share some things with you. But otherwise, I hope you guys have had a wonderful week, and you'll hear from me again in the next video. Take care.